This documentary is dedicated to our ancestors. It is a true story of the Maafa, the unprovoked war waged against Mama Africa and her children by invading Arabs and Europeans from as early as the 14th century. The continuing attacks include physical, mental, and most important of all, spiritual enslavement. African people have lost not only their lives, their land, their language, culture, and Mama Africa's life-sustaining resources, but also a memory of their gods, and with that, their primary collective spiritual link to the Creator. But all is not lost. Opposed to capitalism, individualism, and imperialism is a growing army of Pan-Africanists scattered across the world. Together, they are engaged in revolutionary work for self-determination, healing the wounds of enslavement, reclaiming our heritage and culture, and working to reunite our global family in order to achieve peace, justice, and live once again in harmony with nature and the universe. This film builds on the work of those many African freedom fighters, healers, griots, and warriors, past and present, who engaged in Maafa resistance to ensure our future generations would never forget or give up the fight to bring an end to the war against Mama Africa and thereby reverse the Maafa Legacy. Ashe. Oluwatoyi Egbetu, an African.
Okay, can we stand? I'm just going to hold 1 minute silence to remember the pain and the suffering and the monumental contribution that our ancestors had given to us for us to be here and whose shoulders we stand on. So from now, sis.
I'm going to say a little bit about this libation I'm about to pour because I'm sure we all here know what a libation is, etc. But I think it's important for us as we look at about how we keep reconnecting to the traditions and the rituals that have sustained us. I pour this water into the earth because water is not the enemy of any woman or any man. We pour this water into the earth because the earth is where our ancestors are. And you know, ancestors used to live here, so they speak the language of this world. And they also now live other places, and they speak the language of those dimensions. And so when we pour the water into the earth, we moisten their lips, so it will be easy for them to speak to us and to translate to us the messages that we need to learn from the other world so that we can do what we need to do in this world. We pour this water into the earth for our children, because the children come out of water. They are 9 months in the water in their mother's womb. And we pour this water to remind ourselves that we, as we have come out of our mother's wombs, the children come out of their mother's wombs, that we are an eternal people. That we were built by eternity for eternity. So that we do not be afraid of those who practice genocide against us. That so that we have no fear that we will disappear from the face of the earth. For this earth birthed us out of herself, for herself, and to be forever with her.
The one thing I'm delighted about is that there will be a commemoration, that it will be part of the curriculum, that youngsters will learn about black history, because I don't think they learn enough about black history in this country.
You know, why should a government which lies about everything, you know, lies about why they go to war, lies about the health service, lies about racism, lies about everything, why would they be so concerned about being involved in commemorating something that happened 200 years ago? What's going on?
What we really should have done, all of us, is to have celebrated this bicentenary as actually being a time when this country took the moral lead and gave the example to the rest of the world. It is, in fact, one of the finest chapters in our history that we were the people that did something about it.
We knew that the government will throw sackloads of money at certain black-faced individuals to put on these kind of celebratory projects. I mean, we heard them talking about celebrating.
Glorious day for what's a commemoration, but also, let's remember, a celebration.
And celebrating what? The so-called Wilberfest, where Wilberforce, in his kind white philanthropic nature, freed those little starving, less than human Africans.
These are for the legs. These for the arms. This is for the neck. Works like so.
Actually, what do you think of the way this event's being marked?
Well, I think this ought to be a celebration of the abolition of the slave trade. But there's been too much lamentation and breastbeating. I mean, after all, Britain was a leader in the abolition. And it
was also a leading trader.
It was, but later on it was a leader in the abolition, and it played a huge part in persuading other European powers to end the slave trade. And we ought to be celebrating that. I think we ought to be celebrating those people.
Mr. Wilberforce, we understand you're having problems choosing whether to do the work of God or the work of a political activist.
We humbly suggest that you can do both.
The whole, you know, we enslave you and then we free you, you know, that upsets me more than anything. The film was about him and making him look like a hero. That's, but it was just, it should have been called William Wilberforce. Forget Amazing Grace. There was no Amazing Grace in the film.
Who is John Newton, though? Here's a picture. Do you recognise him? No? Yeah. John Newton was a captain of a slave ship, a mass murderer, a multiple rapist and serial paedophile. By his own admission, he was raping girls that were aged 8, 9, 10, 11. That's what he was doing. That's what most of the European men were doing in Spain, in Holland. Any European countries involved in slavery was doing this kind of thing for hundreds of years. It became part of the culture mentality that we had to do this kind of thing, and then say it was okay to do it. But who is John Newton, though? Recognize these words? Yeah. Do you recognize these? Yes. Guess who wrote that song? So think about the mentality and psychology of people in that people sing this song in church on a regular with gusto and pride, and it feels good to sing this song because it's a religious, spiritual song. And the man who wrote was a paedophile, rapist, and murderer.
It seems to me that this year is becoming more and more a year about whiteness rather than about black people, which you would have imagined would have been at the centre of this year. It seemed to be a year in which, a year for stories of white charity, white virtue, a year about white redemption. We see through films like Amazing Grace, the almost all-white cast can you imagine in a film about slavery.
If they added a bit of Olude's story, how he started, because I know a bit of his story and where he comes from, and I was a bit confused because from what I heard and what I've seen, it didn't really match up.
District Rihanna. This way.
If you're looking for information about slavery or some feeling about it, you're not going to get it from this film.
The abolitionists of the day were not anti-colonial. While they might pretend that they were anti-slavery, they certainly weren't against colonising the entire continent of Africa. They wanted to colonise not only for economic reasons, but also with this Christian missionary agenda.
It's not acceptable that African people's history is being if you like, reconstructed and told through the very eyes of the people that oppress them, that continue to oppress them. That is not acceptable. It is audacious that a council, a government can think this is something that they can spearhead. It's not a matter of, oh, they should have consulted African people. They should have no business leading on that in the first place. It's not their call.
March the 25th is recognised as the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery itself was not abolished until 1833.
You can always look at a period of time where, in fact, an economy was based around a particular trade or industry. It just happens slavery was the trade at that particular time, which I do point out was legal.
These people who supposedly purchased us, yeah, claims that they brought civilization to Africa. So then, if you were so civilized, how is it that you dealt with us the way that you did? How is it that you treated us less than you treat your damn dog?
I think one of the core things I'd like to see happen for 2007 is healing. Because if we look at the effects of all this exposure and people that are going to be telling our story that don't really like us and respect us and don't give a toss about how we feel, we have to be mindful about how will we feel when our young people have been exposed to all of this constantly.
There comes a time, I think, everyone has an experience when they hear something or they read something and you just say to it just offends your very core, it offends your spirit, and you're like, absolutely no way, how dare they?
Let us therefore confess our sins in penitence and faith to our gracious Father, who ransoms us, heals.
As he approached, the Queen looked up. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, at the top of which the Queen was seated.
Let go of me! You said you were let go of me. Let go of me! You're a disgrace. You should not be here. If there's any Christians or Africans, you should be walking out with me. You have disgraced our ancestors. Millions of us are in the Atlantic Ocean without a burial. Not a mention of Samuel Shaw. Not a mention of Nanny. Not a mention of Queen Zinga. And you Africans! Can you let me go? I'll punch you out. You're a disgrace.
I think I was fortunate just to be in the spot at the right time. I was literally pinching myself when Ayen got up. I mean, I thought I was dreaming. I couldn't believe it. That, you know, to be there at that moment and to be able to record that, and, you know, you instinctively as a journalist get the sense that this is an important historic moment.
I was actually in transit from an interview, actually. And then I got home, eventually, and the phone calls kept coming. So it was very difficult for me to feel anything other than the fear, because I was just scared. I didn't know what was happening until I spoke to Toyin himself. But then what kicked in was pride. I just thought, my God, this is my man and this is what he's doing for the community. I only hope that the community can see the actual importance of what he's done, and they can see that he's actually put his life at risk for doing this, because let's face it, he wasn't that far from the monarchy.
The Queen's there, the Prime Minister is there, you got Lord this and Baroness that, and the entire upper echelon of British society. And here's a brother standing up and saying, hey, this is not right. There's something wrong here. This doesn't feel right. This is a disgrace. Millions of my ancestors, their bones are buried in the bottom of the Atlantic. I mean, that's still ringing in my ears. And I mean, I was writing as fast as I could, literally, just to get everything down. And just felt fortunate to be the one that was there to record it, so that, you know, people couldn't say years after that it never happened, because it's right there on the front page of the Toronto Star, even if the British media didn't play it up big.
The event at Westminster Abbey was interrupted when a protester burst in shouting, "This is an insult."
He obviously came from an organisation which had been given a ticket.
The whole service was brought to a complete standstill, just a short distance from the Queen and the Prime Minister, by a lone protester for several minutes. I mean, how representative, first of all, was that protest?
Well, I think it was fairly representative because vast numbers of people in the African diaspora do not believe that they actually get a hearing. And I suspect very many people would have been able to turn up here today expecting that their voices will be heard, and he just represents so many of those.
The authorities are not embarrassed. They think that it was such a momentous occasion. It was an opportunity probably for somebody who felt very strongly to make that protest. We wish it hadn't happened, but not embarrassed at all.
People were always supportive beforehand anyway, but it grew to a massive scale, to the point where he's had invitations all over the world.
Listen, guys, you got to love this brother for what he did. We love you, we love you, we love you. Thank you, thank you.
So Operation Truth was a consciousness-raising campaign targeted at African people, and it was one that sought to undermine any message that says Wilberfest et al. And all the other Granville Sharps, etc., were the people responsible for our freedom and any perceived freedom we have today.
Toyin absolutely takes it personal. That is the only way to take it. Toyin is the most passionate man I know. When it comes to his people, our people, there's nothing more important to Toyin. You think Toyin gave up the 9 to 5. He gave up the fact that he was earning a certain amount, which was always guaranteed. But you know what? The energy that he put into that job, just for him, was going nowhere. It wasn't meaning anything. It just made more people money. And for him, capitalism isn't where it's at.
One of the things I hate is when people say that I take this too seriously. And people actually say that to me. Toyin, you just take it way too personal. I mean, how am I supposed to take it? Like some kind of joke? Is the Maafa a joke? It's kind of like when Europeans say, man, it was nothing personal, it was just business. You tell that to my ancestors on the plantations there.
I am seriously disappointed that you would have had that man who disrupted events at the Slavery Memorial Service brutally shot in cold blood. I said it, and I'm not going to back down from it, because I still think that it was a threatening gesture in front of some of the most important people in the world.
Toyin's not a silly man. He knew that if he went in arms raised, that was a sign of non-violence. And effectively what happened was they became violent towards him. And of course that side of it angered me.
I tend to agree with you. I think someone that kind of seriousness, serious breach of security in front of the head of states and the Queen, either armed guards storm him down, or he faces the consequences. That was not a peaceful demonstration. What this guy did.
And yeah, he was making a point. Yeah, I can see that, and his point was heard by the world.
Sometimes we're walking down the road and people will recognise Toyin and greet him, and show him love, and that's beautiful for me, because it makes me feel, like, yes, people are recognising the fact that this is a man who is standing up for his community.
The Europeans have a way of trying to reduce African culture and African issues to singing and dancing.
Bristol's black community differs over how this year should be commemorated, if at all.
There are many things that we need to do as a people. I think for me, the key thing is to really educate ourselves and to educate those that's coming.
The important thing, I think, is to question, if you like, all the disinformation that's being spread about let's say, what happened in the past, what's happening today, and so on.
Those people in academia will not dispute what has been said because it's the truth. They cannot dispute the historical reality.
Their Oxford dons won't even step into the ring because they know they'll get slaughtered. What they'll have to do is they'll have to get the little upstarts to come and get the battering because the Oxford dons won't turn up to take it. You know, it's just not worth their while and their reputation to get hammered in a debate with sisters and brothers off the street. You know, it's just not worth it for them. So they will kind of try and sideline, and they'll go to their protected areas on Radio 4 or something in order to tell their lies.
While they were freeing us Africans, they were working over in India, working in China and enslaving them. So it just continued.
As well as invading India and so on and so forth, they were also invading Africa itself and set up basically the scenario for their colonial rule as well.
This is correct. They were getting ready for Berlin.
Afterwards, white people continued with the same economic exploitation of those areas through colonialism, and even during slavery and post-slavery through colonialism, there was the same kind of thinking that underpinned slavery continues to resonate today. The big beasts of European philosophy at the time, Hume, Kant, Rousseau, these are still very central figures today, and all of them thought that black people were beneath human reason.
Nigeria, 1943. Britain's largest colony in Africa. The tin mines of the Jos Plateau. The harsh reality of empire.
Almost as soon as the Congo became Belgian, the new owners began preaching their colonial gospel. The litany of how Belgium was bringing civilization, turning a wilderness into paradise, was repeated over and over to willing listeners. And the new Belgian Congo made financial sense. There were diamonds, gold, and a whole host of minerals that Belgium could exploit. Leopold, before giving up the Congo to Belgium, had set up a giant mineral exploitation industry. Why shouldn't Belgium take advantage of that and enjoy the profits without any of the guilt?
I was at home when I called him, Michael Eboda, the editor of New Nation, and I spoke in African, and I said, you're an African newspaper, there's issues going on next year for the bicentenary, and you were nowhere to be seen. I buy your paper I really went into one, to be honest with you, and he was like, oh, okay, I think you should come down and we need to link up.
We sort of thought, well, what can we do to give people a bit of an understanding of what's happening here, and that's when we came up with the campaign, Our Story, Not His Story, because what we wanted to do was interpret history from our perspective.
And then that's how the 2007 Our Story, Not His Story came about, by them, by actually publicising the booklet that the British government have produced, endorsed by David Lammy, which is reflective on the past and looking to the future, which is a disgusting booklet about what's going on next year in their language, in their terms, their ideology and their lies.
Unless we tell our history, others will continue to tell it for us, and they're not going to give us the picture or tell us the truth as we feel we should know it. And they're not going to do it in a way that's going to be empowering or respectful to us. So therefore we have to provide an opportunity where those with the knowledge are able to be provided with a platform in order to tell it how it is, was and should be.
Warmest greetings to your sisters and brothers. My name is Brother.
Greetings, family. My name is Sorin from the Galley Organisation.
Hi, greetings, everybody. I'm Emma. I'm part of the Galley Organisation also.
Hi everybody, I'm Shaka, not just a hip hop artist but also a member of the organisation in Saka.
And I'm Sister Jerry from Morenike, the Pan-African Women's Organisation. Tusongi is part of women are the heart of the nation and a coalition member.
One of the most disrespectful things about 2007 and all the events that happened, there was no focus on the horrors of enslavement, of our resistance, and actually talking about the crimes that perpetrated against us.
James, your name is Toby. I want to hear you say it. Your name is Toby. You're going to learn to say your name. Let me hear you say it. What's your name?
Kunta Kinte.
When the master gives you something, you take it. He gave you a name. It's a nice name. It's Toby. And it's going to be yours till the day you die. Now, I know you understand me, and I want to hear it. Again! I want to hear you say your name. Your name is Toby. What's your name?
Kunta.
Lord God, help that boy. They're gonna whip him dead.
What's your name? Say it. Toby. Who are you? Say your name. What's your name?
Toby.
When you take away somebody's name, and in Africa, a name isn't a label that you call out so you can get a person's attention. In Africa, a name is a title that tells of your character and your purpose in this life. So when your purpose is taken away from you, when your spiritual expression is taken away from you, when your language is taken away from you, when you are ripped from your family, when you are enforced with death, that if you ever are caught reading a book, can you imagine if you are caught reading a book? At best you'll be whipped to an inch of your life, or at worst you'll be put to death.
And violence took several different forms, but the chief form it took was lynching. Between 1882 to about 1927, 3,500 African Americans were lynched in the United States.
The National Party say we don't deal with terrorism and we don't deal with perpetrators of violence. The ANC is committed to violence at this moment, is actually implementing a policy of violence, is continuously making itself guilty of acts of violence.
There was hardly a family in the urban areas and townships and later in the rural areas that had not been affected by detentions, by torture. So it was just about every family in the townships was affected by it.
Over 80,000 Kikuyu are held in detention camps. A detainee, Josiah Karaoke.
Solitary confinement was one of the worst experiences of my life.
The empire is nothing but the enslavement of one country by another. The Gold Coast is an enslaved country. We must rid ourselves of the paralyzing grip of imperialist power.
In the early 1850s, a 21-year-old black man, a field hand, was worth $1,000. And so whites had a vested interest, perhaps to beat their slaves, but not to kill them.
We find on the plantations themselves that flogging is more common than eating. I have seen a slave flogged for praying.
We know about the whipping, we know about the auction blocks and the Europeans coming to test the fine specimen, checking all our orifices, our nasal passage, from our nasal passage to our rectums.
I mean, I know when I was growing up, I learned about the enslavement of African people from reggae music. Apart from that, what did I learn? Oh, I remember reading the Frank Yarby novels. Few people will remember them, but I know that people like Hazel Carby have written about these novels by Frank Yarby, and they romanticized slavery. They made slavery, the enslavement of African people seem like, oh yeah, it was this time when, strong black men were whisking, it was all of that. And so I grew up with that, and I didn't really appreciate how degrading the experience was.
He don't speak much. No, that's on account of him cutting his own throat during the Middle Passage. Fortunately, a kindly surgeon sewed it up again. Bring the piss pot.
He strikes me as the sullen type.
I'm surprised you haven't shipped him back to the plantations and got yourself a new valet.
No, you never do that. Joseph was the first black I ever bought. Seasoned him myself. Reminds me where I come from. Still, Barbados ain't such a bad place, especially this time of year.
African men were buggered. African men were buggered. This is a story that is hardly ever told. Buggery or sodomy was institutionalized on the plantation as a means of emasculation of the African man.
Prolific abuser Father Oliver O'Grady, ordained in Ireland but working in California.
I swear by Almighty God
the evidence I shall give,
that the evidence that I shall give
in this deposition
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
He gave this deposition last year in a civil lawsuit where he was accused of sodomizing a child over 100 times.
If the boy was tall or fat, that wouldn't attract me. I tended to take boys that were rather slim built. I tended to be attracted to the genital area, and there was a part of me would kind of want to be in touch with that, or to discover that, to see that in this particular boy.
You will almost never, ever read about the atrocities that occurred during that period of history. There's almost no books that detail exactly what happened. You've got to search quite deeply for them.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma, over 300 people were killed and thousands were left homeless after envious white people attacked the city's most prosperous black community. Much of this history of racial violence has been erased from public memory. Several state archives have cut out photographs and newspaper reports of lynchings.
These are the remains of Africans. They were killed at the dawn of the 20th century in concentration camps run by the armies of the Kaiser's Second Reich, 30 years before Hitler even came to power. They lie here, forgotten, in the desert wastelands of what is today the modern African state of Namibia.
For almost 100 years, evidence has lain dormant of one of the greatest mass murders. Millions of Africans died in one man's quest for wealth and glory. Until Adolf Hitler arrived on the scene, the European standard for cruelty was set by a king. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, was the personal owner of 1 million square miles of Central Africa and King Sovereign of 20 million Africans.
In contrast to the widely lamented disemboweling of British dead by Zulus, the ruthless execution after the battle of nearly 500 wounded Zulus by the British remained hidden.
In some cases, more than one, a black man was tied on a log and burned from his feet up so that an extensive crowd of people could take pleasure out of the screams and the horror.
An overseer was tried in Spanish Town, not for flogging women, as he routinely did, but for making children eat their own dung.
Hardly anyone talks about the slave maker, the person that was employed to reduce an African from an African into a slave. That was systematically done.
And now, you all pay attention to me. And you too pay attention when I'm talking to you here. Here's where you look when you find yourself in front of a white man. Here, at the toe of his boot. Now, you over there, I want you to repeat. Thank you, Master.
Thank you, Master.
Yes, Master.
Yes, Master.
Please, Master.
Please, Master.
And you, never look a white man in the eye. You hear me? Never. Look at me.
Thank you, Master.
Not in the face, you.
We took every opportunity to revolt against slavery. The response of the enslaver was to teach us in no uncertain terms that we must not, under any circumstance, resist slavery. And so all kinds of methods were used to so-called punish African freedom fighters.
And not in the most humane way. No, we're talking about tied between two horses. So they're running opposite directions and you're ripped apart while you're still alive. We're talking about gunpowder, put in the anus of someone and then set alight. For you to even think of such ways to treat people, that goes beyond, you know what, even the devil would have to turn around and say, you got one up on me.
Then one of the worst and cruelest treatments of a human being began. Jess was kicked down out of the courthouse, down the back steps where a crowd of several hundred was waiting for him. They put a chain on his neck. There were 16,000 people crowding the street to watch this boy be tortured. Jess was tied to the chain over a branch of a tree. The fire was started. They raised Jess from the fire up into the air so that the crowd could see him. There were cheers, like at a football game, cheering the torturers on. When Jess tried to climb up the chains, hand by hand, they cut his fingers off one by one so that all he could do was slap at the chain. They lowered him back down in the fire. A man came up and castrated him. Another man kept a pole so that he couldn't crawl out of the fire. And time and again, they pulled him up to keep him from dying so that the crowd could be satisfied. Until he finally died.
Bring them! Extreme violence was employed to impose Leopold's dominion. The right hands of those who failed to meet rubber quotas were severed. Even young children were not spared. In 1896, a German newspaper reported that 1,308 hands had been gathered in one day. Leopold created a 90,000-strong army to enforce his rule. One of his lieutenants wrote, "Only the whip can civilize the black."
Béto fait voler Iwo, le caoutchouc et la mort. En 1920, le Congo compte 10 millions d'habitants. par rapport à 1880, c'est 2 fois moins. Donc en 40 ans, le pays a perdu 10 millions de personnes globalement. Mais dans certaines localités, les pertes s'élèvent à 60, 70, 90%. Donc le caoutchouc a été la catastrophe. Jamais les peuples du Congo n'avaient connu un désastre pareil.
The descendants of the Herero who had survived the genocide began to revive their history. But what they discovered was that the story of the genocide had been completely wiped from official memory. 3 generations of white Namibians had been born into a nation where only their history was officially accepted. And many struggled to accept what the Herero said about the genocide.
An unknown Zulu soldier wrote, "The Zulu is tired. It shines in the eyes of all the people. The black elephant trembles to the wind while the bones of our kings are crumbling. Nothing but death conquers the white man."
The guards at Shark Island and other camps became involved in the racial sciences that had originally been used to justify the war. Soldiers began to trade in the skulls of dead Herero and Nama people, selling them to scientists, museums and universities back in Germany. The practice was so widespread that this postcard was produced showing soldiers packing the skulls.
This European gynecologist by the name of Marion Sims, who did a lot of research into female gynecological problems. I think we need to know that during slavery, he performed operations on African women without anesthetic. He said that their race made them incapable of feeling pain.
These horrific pictures are of the severed heads of Nama prisoners. They were preserved, numbered and labelled as Hottentots, the German name for the Nama.
In all, he has investigated 778 heads of dead Nama and Ovairero people. Eugen Fischer used this so-called research to prove that the black race is inferior to the Germanic or Aryan race in Europe.
By measuring skulls, facial features and eye colour, Fischer and his protégé sought to prove that the native peoples of Africa were not just inferior, but as he put it, animals.
The ordinary European, the ordinary little white man that you probably live next door to, not him you have to worry about, because he's under a similar kind of tyranny as you. But the difference is, it's his own people doing it to him. You see, you have to remember, you know, that the reason why the European could deal with us the way they did in the Maafa, you know, in the enslavement of our ancestors from the 15th century to the 20th century, you know, was because he was doing it to his own first. He was doing that kind of crap to his own people first. And if you don't believe me, and you live in England, and those of you who might visit England, they got a place they call London Dungeons. Go and check it out. Because them same thing they want to do to feed them people is what they did on a mass scale to ours.
The pain of betrayal is so deep it scars. I mean, we expect our enemies to want to harm us, but our family?
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slave, they didn't kill him. They sent some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said.
Well, you have to educate people, particularly young people. You just say, look, you're going to be stopped. It's not a big deal. Don't freak out. Now, if you've done nothing, you've nothing to worry about. All the young people I educate, I always tell them, until you've done some heinous crime, the police work for you.
You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check.
Villagers were flogged with the shikot, a whip made of rhinoceros hide dried in the sun till it could rip a man's skin to shreds.
The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction.
When this colony was established in 1787, it was meant to be a free colony. But for a variety of reasons, it didn't work that way. The problems with the colony inhabitants really came to the forefront with the arrival of the Nova Scotian settlers. These were blacks who had helped the British during the American War of Independence, and they had been promised some land in Nova Scotia. They were called the Black Loyalists. Many of the promises that the British made to them were never fulfilled. These Nova Scotian settlers that came here had all the resources that would enable them to govern themselves as an independent people. They had black pastors, they had black politicians who had mobilized them in Canada to move over to Sierra Leone.
And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro.
Déjeuner puis retour. 17 avril 1895. Parti avec 80 hommes pour Baoro. Une quinzaine de personnes tuées. Je fais incendier le village. Après un bon déjeuner, nous rentrons en triomphe à Bazoko, avec nos sanglants trophées. 10 juin, nous trouvons Yambisi. Nous envoyons plusieurs groupes de soldats battre la plaine. Ils reviennent quelques heures après avec 11 têtes et 9 prisonniers. Un homme de Bomané parcourant la forêt en appelant un grand cri sa femme et son enfant égarés reçoit une balle d'une de nos sentinelles. On nous apporte sa tête.
We talk about them behind closed doors, but we don't bring them to account. And we have to bring them to account, because until we bring them to account, every form of liberation that we take will be compromised. We need to set examples. I mean, there was a film called The Drop Squad, and they were pulling those renegades off the road.
Check them out, sir. Yeah. Come on.
You know what I loved about The Drop Squad? Was that when they took those renegades off the road, they weren't killing them, they weren't harming them. They were trying to educate them and undo the miseducation. The reality is today, some of those African renegades are so far gone that there is nothing we can do with them.
But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro.
It was in response to pressure from the British community that the government launched Operation Anvil in 1954.
All who carry the mark of the Mau Mau must be hunted out so that peace may come to this troubled colony.
They were now indiscriminately rounding up and detaining huge swathes of the African population.
In the heart of the British Empire, there is a police state where the rule of law has broken down, where the murders and torture of Africans by Europeans goes unpunished, and where authorities, pledged to enforce justice, regularly connive at its violation.
There are too many Africans willing to take a quick buck to sell us out. Those African renegades need to be dealt with.
Loyal witch doctors are recruited to administer cleansing rituals, overseen by British clergymen.
Do you confess that you have taken the Mau Mau oath? Do you seek forgiveness through the blood of Christ our Saviour?
You came out to Kenya in 1954. You came out to serve in the police force?
Yes, I came out to do a couple of years to defeat Mau Mau.
Informers within the Kikuyu community are used to identify Mau Mau sympathizers.
The impression I had was that they were just a sort of terrorists and they need to be sort of put in their place and everything would be all right. I mean, there was certainly beating up of suspects, and on one occasion my chief inspector shot some chap. He said, "OK, let him go," and then shot him in the back.
Since David Livingstone's time, missionaries had seen it as their duty to evangelize the heathen masses of the empire. Converting people to Christianity often meant imposing British sexual morality.
Campaigners say they're appalled at new figures which show a big rise in the number of rapists who are given police cautions rather than face court.
Don't blame the judge, he's only doing his job.
Mr. Williams is not the first paedophile I've heard of to be given a non-custodial sentence.
The committee is slightly disappointed because obviously they were set up under this new diversity banner.
Many of the judges that sit on those benches are also the same people who are involved in the crimes perpetrated against women, perpetrated against children, and they use their authority, their fake authority, to get away with crimes which they should really be, well, I don't believe in capital punishment, but there are times when there are crimes that are so heinous that they need to be dealt with authority.
The ex-cardinal, once dubbed the Inquisitor, has astounded the cynics, delighted the faithful, and done much to restore the Vatican's tarnished moral authority in the wider world.
No words of mine could describe the pain and harm inflicted by such abuse.
The sex abuse scandal has bankrupted several US dioceses with $2 billion in compensation payments. As Cardinal Ratzinger, he issued a Vatican edict 7 years ago to cover up paedophile priests instead of reporting them to the police.
Sadly, the abuse of African women is something that we African men also are now starting to perpetrate. Some of us don't speak out enough against others when we see it happening. Some of us choose immature lovers. And all of us, men and women, sometimes we idolise people that we should really be stoning.
In 1890, Cecil Rhodes sent a column of pioneers north of the Limpopo to found a new British colony. Rhodesia was meant for settlement and became a symbol of colonial opportunity.
It is these vast areas of open country that make Rhodesia so irresistible. Mile upon mile of rolling sunlit hills, where man finds himself in his right element.
But the settlement of Rhodesia also provided sexual opportunities for its new arrivals, who soon created a Euro-African community.
It wasn't an easy problem to deal with, because in the main, under the old British tradition, we tried to preserve our traditions, our heritage, our culture, the fact that we were white people, we were Europeans. But in the sort of situation in which we found ourselves, there was obviously a shortage of women.
Until you walk, run, bite, a mile in her shoes, don't you dare stand in front of me and tell me what a woman must do. She must swing from chandeliers for undeserving spouses and paramours who deny her suffrage by day but crave and praise her womanly wiles by night. Good enough to but not good enough to vote. She must go from the beauty of Africa to the horrors of Massa, go from titties dangling bare and shameless to being branded licentious, temptress, embarrassed, go from land of yams and heat hot to land of cash crops and seller's block, go from God names to no name to his names, now black, now inhuman, freedom stolen, family stolen, now beholden but still golden, field hollering, and ain't I a woman, and ain't I a woman? What a woman must do. She must wipe away tears and reclaim strength after rape, abortion, lover's betrayal, husband's abuse, tricking to buy baby shoes. She must be called a muse, which is just a synonym for use. Put upon pedestals, dainty and protected, and because of that disrespected, Victorianized, victimized, made a paradox of famous anonymity, left to go insane with too much femininity, staring at the yellow wallpaper until you walk, run, bite, just 1 mile in her shoes. Don't you even dare stand in front of me and tell me what a woman must do.
Once you attack the women, you suppress the women, you have controlled the people, because the women then go on to have the children, and the cycle continues on and on and on and on. And we have that, we see that to this day. You know, African women were completely disempowered.
They were told that if you got raped, it was to your benefit. That's what was going on there. So if I rape you, you'll be alright because you have a fair-skinned child. That's the mentality that we're looking at when we talk about light skin, dark skin. That's pretty cool.
The rape of African women produced what we have now, the whole plethora of colour we have in our community.
The reputation of German colonial soldiers when it came to the abuse of African women was so bad that it even became known back in Germany, as seen in this newspaper cartoon strip.
One of the things that's never really spoken about is how, you know, missionaries and priests used their religion, how they hid behind their religion, how they used it to assert a fake moral authority while they were abusing children, abusing women, using the word of God, of Allah, to create and to havoc and to perpetrate the worst crimes against humanity.
He admits to at least 30 victims, both boys and girls, over 2 decades.
What about the little girls did you find attractive?
If she had a short dress or something like that, I might have been tempted to, and often did, maybe raise her dress in a kind of subconscious way, or should I say in a way that she's not aware that I'm doing that, but checking her out at the same time, you know. You get a glimpse of her underwear.
And did you find that arousing?
I did, yes.
This is what European men were doing on slave ships, on plantations in Africa for a couple of 100 years.
The thing that really got to me is when I learned about what they actually done to our women, and not only the women as well, the religion aspects of actually trying to enslave us mentally.
Me and God, we get along good, as I see it. God created me in his image and likeness. That's in the Bible. That's why I'm white.
Then he made the Negro, which is also in the Bible, which says that he immediately regretted it and damned the entire race, leaving them without a soul, fit only to be my slaves. Then with the night come these black ghosts, damned by God. I say ghost only because of their damn blackness, but they have a body. Ah, what a body.
For African women, it's actually been a double struggle of actually struggling against racism, the Maafa, the enslavement, colonialism, at the same time also struggling against sexism, the marginalisation of women, and the disempowerment of women.
So in order to justify the rape of black women, we had to then become a whore.
I'm not sure what you want me to do.
You know what I want you to do? I want you to make me feel bad. I want you to make me feel good. Just make me feel good. I want you to make me feel good. Can you make me feel good? Can you make me feel good?
This is my flavour shaker. Just give it a shake.
Bell Hooks has written a fantastic book called Ain't I Woman, and she breaks it down as to what has happened to how black women have been seen as these kind of uncontrollable sexual beings.
Look at her. To avoid them is to lose God's battle. Except tonight is to conquer them, the victory of light over darkness. At my age, it's something of a task. But with God's help, my friend, and these, well, It's late. I got work to do.
Former Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating has resigned as head of a national review board looking into the Catholic Church sex scandal after serving only 1 year in that capacity. The contentious departure followed Keating's interview with the LA Times, where he compared some church leaders to La Cosa Nostra. In his resignation letter, Keating said, quote, to resist grand jury subpoenas, to suppress the names of offending clerics, that is the model of a criminal organization.
There has been injustice because of slavery.
And the economic advantages and disadvantages have continued.
But that doesn't require apology so much, nor does it require reparations.
I remember when Roots was being shown on television when I was going to school, and I know I must have had about 5 fights that particular week because I was angry. I was angry, and these are things we need to be mindful of.
Kizzy Morrell is one Bristolian who finds it too painful to be reminded of their ancestry.
I don't want to see that. I don't want to see it. I don't. See,
Kizzy,
I remember the time my mum took me to William Wilberforce's museum, and I just sat there as a child and cried. I thought, I don't like the idea of being in shackles and chains and all the rest of it. How do you deal with that?
I have a painful memory of having that scene where Kunta Kinte is beaten to accept his new name, of having that played out, you know, with me there. Not that I was here, but people thought it was very, very funny to come along and go, your name is Toby, you know, and pretend to whip me, you know. They completely ignorant, completely ignorant.
When I went to school, my parents were a bit concerned if I wanted to talk about Africa, because in those days it wasn't on the curriculum, it wasn't on the agenda, and you didn't want to take any Yoruba or Igbo into school, because people would want to laugh at you because you know you're talking African. And then when we had Roots, when that turned up, well, that was it. You know, you had a whole raft of black kids saying, no, I'm not African, hiding their lips. Started to, I don't know, lighten the skin, thinking, oh no, you know, mentioning Kunta Kinte, you know, it was like a swear word. And that really opened a lot of people's eyes, and I just can't believe the impact that series had on people.
It always started as a joke. White children would use the sound of the whip to mess with you, but it always turned into a fight because the idea of race was now out there in the open.
And I remember going to school the next day with a sense of shame, of, my God, that happened to my family. And some of the crueler kids at school would turn Kunta Kinte into a bad thing. So you just shut up, Kunta.
Yeah. Some people, some white people in particular, get a very strong sense that they are being required to feel a sense of guilt about this. Why should they feel any sense of guilt about it?
It's about how you address a particular situation with dignity, with respect. Germany, after the Second World War, way after the Second World War, they apologized to Jewish people, and various Jewish people were like, given reparations for what occurred during the Holocaust. Even Japanese Americans, when he suffered internment during the Second World War, they were apologized.
But you're talking about something in living memory there.
Kulandira po barandira ngo kutumbongo hida kisho okuye kulandwa birumbu binga birando andu nene bitumbu choli bechalando andu liwe choli buzoli andu otate okulandwa be amushirongo kinyamawa mfange berandira ale mundu isho ali karani.
In this country, African people are daily denied access to information about our history, our culture, our identity. That's a continuing crime against humanity that began with the enslavement of African people.
Nasepeli mingi na makambo yo zaliko yebisa ngai
tokendeka tozolanda yo
oyo esika ndako yango ezalaki oyo ezaki mire ya ebale longwa tikuna mosusu pele banga longwa oyo esika Monsieur Clark avandaki awo tango wana kaunchu kilo zomi mais soki okokisi te babomi yo to bakati ya maboko.
Mokolo mosusu babomaka ndeko na ngai ya mwasi pe bakataka ye moto, maboko na makolo po alataki pauni. Kombo ya ye Mobe.
It will be painful initially, but it is of the greatest urgency and importance that African people have an engagement with what happened to us during the time of the Maafa.
After a while, you start to think, you know what, oh, let's get off the subject. Oh, you're going on about slavery too much. Let's move on. But we only feel like that because we don't know the extent of what actually happened, what was going on, and how deeply rooted it is, and how it actually affects us even today.
Because I know somebody in her 40s who knows her either great-grandmother, because they have children early and so they get great whatever quite early. And she knows, she can tell you things about her grand or great-grandparents who told her a lot of things. But funny enough, she didn't write anything down and so on. And her grandmother, who is something like 80 now, is able to remember vaguely some of the things.
Dr. Les Henry has been mentoring youngsters for the past 20 years.
I know that I'm an African, but I've taken a bit of time to do some research into what peoples who look like me have contributed to civilization for millennia. But if you haven't, and the only introduction you get to being an African is that you were a slave and then you were freed and you're still catching up, of course you'd want to disassociate yourself from that history. And this is what happens in schools.
This pain which dare not speak its name, the pain that dare not speak its name, has not been recorded, has not been let out, not been released. It is a disease that's growing inside our very spirit, inside our very culture. And it is a disease unrecognized, unspoken about, untalked about, and therefore unhealed.
A lot of the African Caribbean students absolutely resent being identified with only that aspect of history. It just never surprises me when black children say, I don't want to know anything about that.
Things are so bad now that even us Africans in the West, in the diaspora, when we see something about Africa, something going wrong, we actually switch the channel. We don't want to hear it. We can't deal with it. We can't confront it. We'd rather hear some entertainment news about silly programs like Big Brother than actually listen to the facts of what's happening to our family, the abuse that's happening to our family. And this is not just happening in the UK, this is not just happening in the Americas, it's happening in the Caribbean, it's happening across the continent, it's happening across the world.
And unfortunately, this pain is also passed down from generation to generation. And it's something which needs to be healed.
You know that song, I can't remember who first sung it, but that was my first experience of nightclubs in the UK, By the Rivers of Babylon, where we sat down. And, you know, it was that, you know, when something just hits you and you suddenly become aware. And I can remember at the time, it was almost as if, you know, that experience that people had somehow, you know, you sensed it. And you know, when people talk about ancestral spirits being everywhere, it was almost as if at that moment some ancestral spirit had seen, oh yes, here's a person who's open to the opportunity. And then the wave of pain.
We can't forget because we feel the pain. I mean, personally, I have flashbacks. I have flashbacks about how it was like on the boats, you know, squashed up, weeing on yourself, menstruating, excrement, eating there, sleeping there, dying there, noises, crying, and so on. You just can't forget it. And the reason why we also can't forget is because as a result of enslavement, that's how we are defined in this world.
You know, one of the tricks that the Europeans and the Arabs have always done is to use people who look like us to demonize us.
They use people who look like us to say the things that they believe that they want to say, and therefore we attack those that look like us instead of the people, the true source, the true enemy.
A Nigerian moral theologian I met recently was quite frank about it. African culture has always lacked a developed sense of common humanity, of the solidarity that extends beyond village and family, and which entails a commitment to the common good. This us and them mentality was not just tribal. The moral deficit explained, he said, how African tribal chiefs had felt no qualms about capturing slaves from neighboring districts and selling them to white slave traders, and later doing land deals with white settlers. Hence also Africa's propensity to turn to massacre and genocide, such as we saw in Rwanda and Congo.
I always say to people, the day when I know that Africans are accepted as members of the human family is when Africans are normal. The day when I can go to places like Lord's Cricket Ground when I was staying there a few years ago when I was invited by University of Leeds, and they didn't want to let me in to the room that was already booked in my name because they couldn't equate Dr. Henry with this Rastafari brethren who was in front of them.
Miss Uhuru has her admirers, to be sure, but for centuries many black men yearn for the white woman. Before Uhuru, in her gleaming mansions and her concealing garments, she remained an unattainable dream. But now, for the price of a drink, liberated Africans can make that dream come true. They can watch the white woman draw aside her mysterious veils, and lo, there she is, revealed at last.
You'll hear many brothers say that they're conscious, yeah, right, brother man. But you ask them, like, who do you date? What sisters do you check for? You know what I mean? And you'll find out they'll say, well, you know what, I don't do European women, but, you know, I'll do Hispanic, I'll do Asian, I'll do anything other than African. And they kind of use this as a way to say that, well, look, it's got a bit of colour in it, so therefore, you know what I mean, I'm not self-hating.
We all have stories we'll talk about when we first relaxed our hair. We talk about how our hair's difficult to manage. My hair's too coarse, it's too tough.
Here, we met a hair expert who does permanent waving in reverse. Her clients are all Africans. They're born with a permanent wave. But do they like it? They're women, aren't they?
Madame C.J. Walker started out as a humble, hard-working Louisiana washerwoman. Losing her hair due to a scalp condition, she experimented with household chemicals and stumbled across a concoction that straightened the kinks in her hair.
Final stage starts when combs come into play.
Madame Walker put her face on the product and went door to door. It wasn't long before she established herself as one of the first female black millionaires.
I remember actually experimenting before I processed my hair with some African hairstyles. You know, the ones where they get thread and they twist around your hair. And a friend of mine did that for me. And I remember going home and my dad said, "What's the matter with you? You think you're African?" And I thought, I didn't say it to him, but in my mind I thought, well, yeah, I am. You know, I from that age I recognize that's what I am.
The African female has learned to be a modern woman. In the past, when she walked nude, she was bought and sold like cattle. That past she knows works against her. Now she will be wooed and courted, wondered at and sought out. Now she hides herself, not from shame, but from strategy. Bare she was fair game. Covered she's a mystery. Bare she was bartered. Dressed she can decide for herself. Aggressively, like a tyrant, like the white woman.
Introducing hair straightening products to black women meant that more black women could look less black. I don't know if she'd realise it then, but it was the beginning of a, I don't know, cultural shame.
You can't talk about, you know, maybe just try looking inside and seeing that what's happened to us over the years, maybe it's actually penetrated a deep part of your soul that you find unreachable now, so you're just covering it over with more makeup and, you know, more bleach and more hair straightening. Do you know what I mean? More clothes that you feel are going to conform to society's way of how you should dress.
going to let your hair grow black again?
That is a good question.
When I'm ready.
Have to say, Mrs. F, quite like her.
Well, my dear, blonde hair looks nice on you, but I never see a colored girl with blonde hair before.
Stop. I want it to be straight and smooth.
It is fascinating that they gave her a contract for a weave, because that's not even all her hair. So that's interesting. And I do think that they're aiming this at black women.
It's straight, it's hot, and it lasts.
They're talking about a look and a way of being in the world, and that you can achieve that with L'Oreal.
I had their mascara, their lip gloss, their everything, and now I'm actually one of the L'Oreal family members.
Right now, in this day and age, it's absolutely fine for you to endorse just about anything.
A lot of people are doing it these days, Mum. Look at Ria Ferd now.
And Open, she's a blonde.
A lot of people doing all kind of nonsense these days. I don't see why Lana have to follow them.
I'm not following anyone.
You see young girls trying to copy celebrities like Naomi Campbell or Kerry Washington. They want to have flicky hair. We don't have flicky hair. We fundamentally do not have that. But yet still, we're still striving for that. And what happens is, if you have children, you pass on those onto your children as well. So they copy what you do without questioning it.
My girls straighten their hair and they hardly have a kink in it. You know, it's like this the whole time, you know. And I'm saying embrace your blackness, and they say, oh yeah, like you do, Mum. What can you say?
You don't see many white people who think, right, I want to change how I look. I know, I have Afro weaves. When white people copy or reproduce African hair, it's a joke. Our hair is a joke to them, but the other way around, it's big business.
This is the whole idea of this society, that you should be constantly trying to, you know, take a part of yourself, or you should be constantly trying to do something about the way you look, when really it's all about inside. You know, it's all about the person you are inside.
We have to be careful as a people, again, not to judge sisters who do either put weave or who relax their hair or whatever, because like I said, I've gone through that journey. Many sisters are still going through that journey, and they just need to actually, you know, bite the bullet really and go through that process.
When you look at Beyonce, the first thing you think is Beyonce. That's Beyonce, yeah? Then she's a black woman.
But the fact that some African men find African women undesirable means that they find themselves undesirable. It means that they find their mothers undesirable, their sisters, their aunties. It means that they don't recognize that by hating on their own sisters, they're hating on themselves. And likewise with sisters looking to find brothers who are lighter-skinned in order to perpetrate the whole idea of having lighter-skinned baby with so-called good hair. You know, this is the Maafa. This is the history, the legacy of enslavement just continuing on today.
Most 4-year-olds know their skin colour. The university researchers interviewed over 200 children from all over the UK and discovered which characteristics they put with each ethnic group.
Do you think that any of them would be kind? Anybody else, or is that it? That's it. Nice choice. Okay. Anybody else? Do you think that any of them would be mean?
Do you think any of these children are really nasty? Which one would you like to play with?
Almost all of the white children choose the white child for the good things, and more often choose everyone else for the bad. The astonishing thing is that half the time the black children do the same.
Which one would you like to play with?
This one.
Why do you think that these ones might be really smart and know all their numbers and their letters?
Because they got a white face.
Which one would you like to have over to your house to play the most?
This one.
Which one would you like the best? You'd like that one the best? Do you think that any of these children snatch things? Who do you think would get into trouble?
What's shocking is that whilst most white children prefer people like themselves, the same isn't the case with black children. Normally, 4-year-olds prefer others like them. The fact that black children don't shows that they're picking up on racial stereotypes that favour whites. And the white children are picking up on them too. These stereotypes need to be constantly challenged if they're not going to become entrenched.
Do you have to be black to be a black icon? Well, I sent Shay to the Emmas last night to ask the guests what they thought.
Well, if you look in the past, people like Lord Attenborough, given his fantastic contribution over Steve Biko, over Gandhi and other things, has marked himself out as an icon, although he happened to be white.
Things like awards now these days seem to just amalgamate into one. So you know, I thought it was the Multicultural Award, but what can you do?
No, I think, the Emma Awards, it's a multicultural award, so it's about people from all different backgrounds. So, I think we got to kind of push that to a side and think, who is the best sporting personality out there?
What do you say, Dylan?
I think that it's completely possible and plausible that David Beckham is a hero for the black community, but I mean, it is farcical, isn't it? It's like the Darkness or Franz Ferdinand winning a Mobo. I mean, it's just mad.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
One of the things I hate is when we knock our own organisations, our own institutions that are trying to do positive works that uplift us.
I'm joined now by the founder of the Mobos, Kanya King. Kanya.
Hi.
I wanted to start by saying, can you explain what does the Mobo stands for?
Okay, most people will know that Mobo stands for music of black origin. Most popular music today has their origins in black heritage, and we just want to commemorate that.
And when the Mobo Awards were first announced, that's exactly what it did. But when we collaborate and we compromise ourselves for the money, we become part of the system that's working against us.
Best DJ.
For Best DJ at the 2007 Mobo is Yo Dog Tim Westwood.
What do you think of this whole glamorising violence thing, like 50 Cent and all that? Do you think they actually doing that, or do you disagree?
I think they're just telling their story. Yeah. 50's definitely real. He's telling a ghetto story there about those early drug dealers in the 80s.
Do you not think there's a problem underlying there that like DJs they're quick to big up tunes that talk about violence and whatnot, but yet again there's artists that don't get airplay, such as like Common, Talib Kweli, that's talking about real issues.
People like Common do get play.
But
Common
not as much play as someone like 50.
Well,
50's not.
We really heavily support Common. I think what you've got to understand is like 50's the biggest artist in the world, and like look at how he's turned his life around and made himself so successful. He earned something like $100 million last year.
But the truth be told, now he's converted something negative into money, yeah? But now, at the same time, that's getting converted back into negativity because he's producing an image and a message that is nothing but guns and killing and drugs. And what, do you think people in the streets really need to they don't want that rubbed in their face in the entertainment as well as in real life?
I think the people in the street want what they want. But like a lot of 50s records now are, in the club, candy shop, they're just party records.
Something like Candy Shop, that's negative again. You know what I'm saying? That's negative.
I think that's just about having a good time.
You think so?
Shop. I have no problem with Candy Shop.
I have a big problem with a nice debate now. Let me just settle this for a minute.
Best UK female.
So the winner is Miss Amy Winehouse. She goes.
I think it's an insult that an African artist like Estelle, who felt she had to leave this country in order to get recognised for her work, was then invited to give an award for Best Artist to a Jewish drunk junkie at an award for the music of so-called black origin. I mean, that's just crazy, and that is just so downright insulting.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. I'll give it back to you.
Oh, thank you.
Isn't it a bit of a shame that it took you going over to the States to make it and it didn't happen over here?
The thing is, I always look at it like this. If they're not offering you a job in your own country, go where they're offering you a job.
What a lot of people don't understand is how crazy-making racism can be. So for me, I feel as if, my parents are graduates. Like, my mother is a sociologist, my father is a lawyer, and yet growing up in this country, would you believe it, It never occurred to me that I would go to university. And when I was in university, I kept on thinking, anytime now they're going to tell me, oh, you're not meant to be here, you know. Throughout my academic career, both as an undergraduate and as a postgraduate student, I constantly had that feeling that I'm not supposed to be here. And even now, I sometimes feel I'm going to get caught out and someone's going to say, well, actually...
I think sometimes it's intellectualized too much. For me, it's the internal struggle I'm going through every day. I'm living it. I'm living it. My ancestors lived it. I'm living it today. Every day for me, the Maafa is a part of my reality. I think people need to understand that. Sometimes, you know how it is for us as a people. Sometimes you feel like you're going mad, especially when you know what's really going on and what's been going on. Sometimes you feel like you're insane. The Maafa, it's a deep thing, man. It's a continuous, the legacy of it. I mean, the fact that you have to beg for jobs in the first place is part of the Maafa. And then when you get the job, you're there on the plantation, and the discrimination you face when you're there, the discrimination you face in school, you know, all of the various disadvantages and underprivileged status that we've got in every aspect of our lives, that's all Maafa. So the Maafa is a big thing, let alone talking about colonialism, neo-colonialism, slavery.
We invested 310 years of slave labor, 310 years, every day of which your and my mother and father worked for nothing. Not 8 hours a day. There was no union in that day. They worked from sun up until sundown, from can't see in the morning until can't see at night. They never had a day off. And on Sunday, they were allowed to sit down and sing about when they die, they wouldn't be slaves no more. When they die.
Africans are here doing jobs that a friend of mine calls cleaning jobs. And they're not all cleaning jobs, but the pay is of a cleaner. So whether that be the security guard, the traffic warden, whatever, right? They're just called cleaning jobs, right? And that's what Africans have come here doing. And some of them people got PhDs, some of them got 3 PhDs, and they're traffic wardens. People are learning about nothing.
Remember, a black man with a mop, tray, or broom in his hand can go damn near anywhere in this country. And a smiling black man is invisible.
You know, if you look at it, practically every negative social statistic in this country, let's just take this country alone, dealing with our community is at the bottom of practically every one of those statistics. We're more likely to be unemployed, we're less likely to be educated, we're more likely to be in jail, we're more likely to be homeless than practically any other group of people in this country.
So when I still see us struggling within their system, still working within their system, still teaching within their system, still earning within their system, and when I experience beautiful brothers and sisters within this country, when I come across beautiful organisations, whoever they may be, I think to myself, my God, you know what? You're actually a freak of the white man system because you was never meant to be here. But when I see you, I see the hope of what we can be.
The way Africa links to people over here in England in the streets, like of East London, wherever you're from, get me, is because it all started there. And the things that are bred into you, your mentalities and your frame of mind that's bred into you, is because of what happened in Africa.
So, what is the actual difference between a Hutu and a Tutsi?
According to the Belgian colonists, the Tutsis are taller, more elegant. It was the Belgians that created the division.
How?
They picked people, those with thinner noses, lighter skin. They used to measure the width of people's noses. The Belgians used the Tutsis to run the country. Then when they left the power to the Hutus. And of course, the Hutus took revenge on the elite Tutsis for years of repression. Am I telling the truth, Paul?
Yes, unfortunately. Please take this to the general. Benedict is our finest journalist in Kigali, an expert on the subject.
So what are you, Paul?
I am Hutu. Gentlemen.
More champagne?
More champagne would be nice. Thank you. Nice.
Excuse me, honey. Can I ask you a personal question? Are you a Hutu or a Tutsi?
I am Tutsi.
And your friend, Tutsi?
No, I'm Hutu.
They could be twins.
Here at Peckham Library, I'm joined by Diane Abbott, Labour MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, and also by Lola Ayen, who is a former Conservative councillor and mayor in Wandsworth. Let's start with you, Lola. What do you say are the needs of Africans, the African population in London, that aren't being met at the moment the way you think they should be?
Well, let me start off by saying it's wonderful we're having this debate. This is long overdue. For those of people like myself who have been here for many, many years, we have been saying to the Caribbeans that we are different from them. That's the first thing. So the problem that we Africans face in London has to start with the Caribbeans. We know by heritage they were once Africans. Their descendants were. But those of us who came from Africa, we clearly are different from them.
In many ways, I agree with Lola. Of course, everyone's different. Africans are different from West Indians. Jamaicans are different from Trinidadians. People from my parents' parish, Clarendon, are different from people from the parish of St Anne's. But, and I also think, I agree with Lola in this sense as well, that we need to have more African MPs, more Asian women MPs. We need a parliament that looks like Britain. But I'm a little wary of emphasising division.
You keep talking about not wanting a division. We are already divided. You claim to represent us, Diana, and yet you have no understanding of the issues that affect us.
Have you made things more difficult for yourself, though, when you've made comments in a Jamaican newspaper talking about the corruption in Nigeria, that obviously Nigeria makes everyone else look like amateurs in terms of corruption?
Well, not just corruption. I don't think if you actually read the article. I talked about the awful environmental disaster in the Niger Delta, where millions of Nigerians are suffering because of oil pollution. And the things I said are things that have been extensively written about elsewhere.
You started by saying that we live in mud.
And it was reasoned argument.
You started by saying that we can hardly comb our hair. No. That's what you said. You said that when you were young, Diana, that you were told that we live in mud huts and that we cannot comb our hair. How dare you say that?
Let her answer.
No, the issue is that
she was making points about a nation, a country, aside from its ethnicity, and that has aroused anger in certain communities.
We need an apology
Can we hear her justify it?
With respect, the article in the Jamaica Observer that you're talking about, I was talking about the democratic process, I was talking about corruption, I was talking about the oil industry, and they were criticisms of the multinationals, the Nigerian government.
Lola, look, can I just draw attention to remarks I've read attributed to you? People like me of West African origin tend to have more solid and traditional family structures than Afro-Caribbeans, and probably a greater sense of discipline and desire to achieve through study and hard work. I mean, conversely, those kind of remarks are going to be very offensive to African-Caribbean people here.
I have to say to you, there's a difference from what is true and what is a fact. The reality is that our family life differs from the Caribbeans. And you've heard from the clip we have seen that we, West Africans, are seen as black and not African. So anything that's supposed to go to us goes to the Caribbeans. And the Caribbeans seems to be in charge of any resource that is available. Nothing has stopped me.
You were a councillor, you were elected. What is stopping Africans coming and achieving what Diane Abbott has achieved?
For a start, we need, first of all, the Caribbean blacks to acknowledge that we are not the same group as they are. To begin to learn about Africans, to begin to listen to us, to begin to understand that even if they have their African heritage, they are not Africans anymore.
My point is this, that I think it's very important that everyone's proud of their cultural identity. But if we allow, borough by borough, sort of white politicians to play divide and rule amongst the black community, nobody wins. And that's my real concern.
So the whites are more useful to us than you black Caribbeans. I have to say that very clearly. If you turn to a
there's a but there, there's a but there.
But, as I say, everyone should be proud of their cultural identity. And, I try and represent everybody to the best of my ability.
Sometimes I wonder, are black MPs open to more scrutiny than white MPs? Because people are saying, can a black, Jamaican MP represent, the African community? Of course they can. Can white MPs represent their black communities? They've been doing it for years.
We run through the war with the least artillery. You can break our back, but never our spirits.
Akala draws direct links between life on the plantations and life on the streets of London today.
The reality of our situation as young black people, especially young black men, is not a positive one, it's not a pretty one. No other community routinely kills each other over such trivial reasons. I'm from Peckham, you're from Brixton. I've got a red bandana, you've got a blue bandana. I mean, you can literally directly see the same characteristics that we were exhibiting and that were implanted in us with slavery.
We've got people who are in Africa who look down on people in the Caribbean. We've got people in the Caribbean who look down on people from Africa. We've got African Americans who look down on everybody who's from outside of Detroit.
When supplies of tin from the Far East had disappeared after the Japanese occupation in 1942, the British had begun to use the Pilgani as forced labour to extract the vital deposits.
working on the Motherland Beckons in Nigeria, for me, I was happy because normally, I'm not being funny, Nigerian people tend not to be into the whole issue of enslavement. They tend to sort of like, oh, it's nothing to do with us, we were not slaves, it's not, you know, the language they use, everything is bad.
You see, one of the most ignorant things an African from the continent can say to an African in the diaspora is that they are slave babies. We need to put that myth to bed. Africans were enslaved on the continent.
There's this myth that those who were enslaved were just bad, but that's nonsense. I mean, that's something that's quite close to my heart as someone who's descended from enslaved Africans. You know, it's very disrespectful. It's probably the most disrespectful thing you could say to me is to say, well, I'm just descended from a bunch of hooligans who, you know, were never really worth much in the first place.
Let's be clear about that. Let me repeat that. Africans were enslaved on the continent. So the whole idea that it's only the best that was taken, or it's only the rubbish that was taken, is rubbish. It was our family that was taken.
Colonel George Stanley, Secretary of State for the Colonies, March 1943.
The number of workers employed in the Nigerian tin mines is 14,098. While the conditions cannot be regarded as entirely satisfactory, due to the attempt to attain the maximum production of tin, it has recently been decided to award a bonus of 4 shillings a month to all mine workers.
You know, but the Ghanaians are more in tune with the issues of enslavement and so on, and I was really impressed that Nigeria are now taking this upon themselves as well to talk about this enslavement without sort of brushing it under the carpet.
Divide and rule is one tactic they use where they incite people against one another. Light skin against dark skin, field slave against house slave, male against female. That's not an excuse to excuse the behaviour or excuse what's going on now, but it is the root, and you can't solve something without tackling the root cause of it.
The colonisers have actually always understood the importance of language. Importance of language in dividing us, importance of language in uniting themselves. Imposed their own languages upon us. When they took us away, that's the first thing that they took away from us, is our languages. When they took away our language, they took away our culture, our state of mind, the ways that we express God, the different ways that we can actually speak of God.
Okay, there's this myth that without Islam, without Christianity, or before these religions came to Africa, that we were these primitive people with no laws, no customs, no traditions, no spirituality. And, you know, this is a complete myth that needs to be debunked.
There are many genuine and legitimate ways of being African. And we need to understand that. And once we understand the cultural unity of Africa, we're going to see that the cultural unity of Africa is a very important basis for negotiating political, economic, and other kinds of unity.
Yeah, they've created so many divisions among us, you know, on all kind of different levels, from some even on the basis of height, for example. You know, a lot of us have been conditioned to look on certain communities in Africa who are, you know, kind of short by other people's standards, to look on them as lesser human beings. They've been categorized as like even more subhuman than certain other Africans. Some Africans, you know, on the basis of complexion, on the basis of hair, you know, like it's better if you've got light skin and straighter hair or whatever because you look more like them.
There is no shame in having respect for someone else. There's no shame in having respect for nature. There's no shame in having respect for the Creator. There's no shame in having respect for the ancestors. What there is shame is having this ego that prevents you from recognizing that we are family, that we are one.
You see, part of our conditioning is to think that because we live somewhere else, we're from a different island or even from a different part of the UK, that we're different. And, you know, continental-born Africans are different from Africans born in diaspora.
We tend to just think of the English-speaking Caribbean rather than the entire area. And that's also part of the legacy. It is part of the divide and conquer process. This is what's been left. This total disenfranchisement of the African population of the Caribbean. Everyone else within the Caribbean maintains a degree of their heritage. If you're Chinese, Jamaican, then you still got your Chinese heritage. If you're Indian, Caribbean, then you still got your heritage. If you're a white Caribbean, then you still got your English heritage. But the African part is the part that's missing, and yet that is the strongest part. If you go to Jamaica, it's the strongest part, and yet still it's the part that's missing. Why is that? Because many of us in the Caribbean have forgotten our own heritage, and we're almost ashamed of it because what we hear of our heritage is the enslavement process.
We've got kids here who are going around killing each other because one's from Hackney and one's from Tottenham, you know, and all of these things are things we have to deal with.
For a new generation of Londoners, postcodes have literally become danger zones, marking out no-go areas.
This typical Hackney street is not all it appears. In the minds of young locals, there's an invisible line. It's a line that separates E5 from E9, and going over that line could lead you in the path of rival gangs.
It's a problem that Biko and Wes have to deal with every day. Their postcode is E5. Stepping one street away can lead to trouble.
All the stuff that happened in Africa, get me, the slavery and all that, that's bred into you. Hate of your brother, you get me, hate of the person who looks like you, who's wearing the same clothes. You hate him because the things that were bred into you and the things that were taught to your ancestors.
When I go to different areas of London, I feel under threat because of these people that feel so tight to the place that they live in, so tight to the place to the people that are around them, that they feel that any intruder's going to destroy that, and I'm a threat to them, even though I'm not even in the gang myself.
The Maafa is Africans killing Africans for foolishness, you know, fighting for turf or ends that they don't own. That you don't own. You're killing a man over ends that you don't own. You don't have no shop there. Yeah? You don't own the buildings. You don't own the businesses along that area. You don't own the properties within that area. You just shop there. But you're going to kill a man for ends, for turf, for wood.
Brixton 2002. A 13-year-old boy is seen brandishing a pistol on a street corner. A police armed response unit arrive and approach him with their guns drawn. They order the boy to drop his weapon, but he doesn't respond. One officer manages to kick the gun from the youth's hand and he's arrested. It's only afterwards the police realise the gun is a replica, unable to fire. Guns have gone from being a tool of the criminal trade to something young people want to be seen with, whether they're real or not.
And so now, here in Britain, we have a police force strictly set up for our people. Now, what kind of madness is that? Any crime that is heinous is supposed to be dealt with what we call the serious crime squad. Why do you have to set up something different?
Many black people feel confident that they do actually have Trident. Many of us view Trident as their own personal police service.
I must say, I have never heard that from the community, what you're talking about, and it's strange. I kind of think that I've probably got more research in that area than yourself. I've never actually heard anyone say to me, I feel like Trident is our personal police force.
Well, I mean, obviously there's always going to be some people who say, you know, Trident's just about picking on black people.
Are they into guns?
Detective Constable Rod Austin has been with Trident since it began in 2000.
Gun crime's spreading, and it's not just spreading within the black community, because we have got a gun culture.
There's many Europeans out there in this country who have registered guns, but we're making up noise about a so-called gun culture with our youth.
Growing up in a deprived community can make you feel powerless. And increasingly, the gun is seen as a tool of empowerment.
There's no doubt about it. We're simply adopting what's happened in America at the end of the day. People, rather than sort out their problems by arguing or fighting with fists, you know, it's gone one step further where they want to start looking at where they want to take revenge with guns.
We've got a Mac 10 in a pink bag.
A Mac 10?
Mac 10.
Jesus.
The Mac 10 is a lethal machine pistol that fires 1,100 rounds a minute. It was the weapon of choice for US Special Forces during the Vietnam War. In the past 4 years, Trident has seized over 650 guns in London.
Where are the guns coming from?
Well, they have come from, in the main, gun suppliers, but also in the case of the replicas that have been converted, usually white middle-class people have got a gun background in terms of they have been gun suppliers, legal gun suppliers in the past, and the conversion factories that we've taken out have been white middle-class people.
This farmhouse in Derbyshire was the base of one of the largest illegal arms dealing enterprises in Britain.
As young children played in the early evening sunshine in Hackney, shots rang out. Two gangs had clashed in London fields and guns had been pulled. Already this year there have been 13 youth murders in London, many of them gang-related.
Police say there are 170 separate gangs operating around the capital, with more than a quarter said to have been involved in murder.
If anything, maybe what we need, if we're worried about youth not knowing how to shoot guns and just shooting up a place like this, maybe we need some Black Panther type organisation here that's going to train
Like, we're the only people that have got our own black on black crime unit. Like, what is that about?
Killing is killing, you know. A black man killing a black man is murder. Most foul. So why you have to set up something different? Unless you got a pre-organized plan to make sure that that crime stays within our community.
I didn't join the police as a racist, but whilst I was in the police, I became one. We just went out and made a beeline for whosoever we wanted to arrest. So you'd say you'd seen them try 2 or 3 car door handles, you'd seen them sizing someone up at a bus stop, and you'd see them put their hand towards a lady's handbag. People had no chance of proving their innocence. Evidence was planted, that was a common practice, and assaulting people was almost a daily occurrence.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, is standing by his claims that the media is institutionally racist.
There was sympathy for that view at the Voice newspaper.
I think the comment has been overshadowed by his little gaffe about Soham. But the main point that he was trying to get across, which is that media tend to be institutionally racist, I think he's spot on.
Personally, I wouldn't blanketly accuse the entire media of being institutionally racist. However, I think he is right to raise the issue about the disproportionate level of reporting in terms of some murders over others.
He accused the media of being institutionally racist in the reporting of killings. But the Metropolitan Police Commissioner stands by his argument that the media covers deaths in ethnic minorities less prominently than those of white victims.
In January 1981, bitterness intensified when 13 black youngsters were burnt to death at a party in New Cross in southeast London. 3 months later, the failure to charge anyone for what the black community was convinced was a racist attack seemed a betrayal by the police.
He teaches us to obey the law, to respect law enforcement officers, as long as these law enforcement officers respect themselves and respect the law that they represent.
I saw 2 police officers and a group of youth, you know, and I just heard noise, so I was very concerned. The 2 police officers had their batons out and they were like hitting the children with it. And I was trying to, at first, approach the police officers and I told them, you know, I don't see that these children have any weapons, and I didn't understand why they were hitting them. The way I see things, you know, these are children and they're the adults, so I would have expected, you know, the police officers to actually have the situation in hand, and they didn't. They were out of control, you know, and the children were like in tears, you know, very angry, not understanding what was happening, why they were being attacked by the police.
You know, when I came to this country, I was told, if you get lost or if you have any problem, just go to a policeman.
Yes, we were told that.
You know, you wouldn't ask anybody directions. You would go to a policeman because you see them as nice people.
Can you see all the different colored houses sitting by the sea? Well, this part of the story in Balamori asks, which is the house for me? Is it yellow, is it red, or should we go to the greenhouse instead? White, orange, blue or pink, or which colored house do you think?
Christopher Alder choked to death on a police station floor in 1998, while 4 officers did nothing to help him.
Christopher Alder died on the floor of a police station. This is how he got there. Still alive, he was carried in by 2 police officers. Police chatted as he lay beside the counter, unattended, face down on the floor. 11 minutes passed before officers realised the seriousness of his condition. Christopher Alder died that night. The former paratrooper choked to death.
I was trying to calm down, at the same time another child as well, who, was in tears and who had been physically beaten by the police, by a police officer. And I explained to him that he needs to calm down, and that he didn't need to actually say anymore because they could arrest him, and once he'd be arrested, we wouldn't know what will happen, what may happen to him in police custody.
I was walking along Acre Lane, as usual, and I saw a policeman with a young black guy. And he was really giving it to him, boxing him, dragging him, and my heart began to pound, and I thought, oh my God, he's going to kill that boy. And then someone was coming up to me and I looked, and it was a tall, handsome policeman. And he looked down at me and he says, what are you looking at? And I says, I'm looking at the way he's doing that boy. And he says, mind your own business and go your way before you get your share.
There was a third police officer that came my way, and as he saw me, he took his stick out and he opened it, and he told me to actually move on the other pavement. And I told him that the pavement did not belong to him, and that I was a citizen in this country, and that the pavement was free. And furthermore, I was an adult and I'm concerned, and this is a child, and I wanted to see exactly what was going to happen. I wanted to make sure that things would be fine for this child.
I have scars, I have scars on my body. I have scars mentally. I have scars spiritually. I have scars on my record. Recently I went to get a police check and found I had a criminal record based on the fact that I was defending our community children.
The other adults that were there were actually keeping quiet. They were just like watching what was happening.
If we don't step forward, what that means to our young people is, well, you don't care. So why should I care? If you're not even going to stop and help me out here, then, I don't see why I should care. I don't care about myself. I don't care about the other young person over there.
We were at risk of being assaulted. In fact, we were assaulted. I insisted the police were called, and when the police came, they took the word of Yurugu over me, even though I had called them, and I was duly arrested. My DNA was taken, I was held in a police cell, but I know that is part of what we have to go through. We should not shy away from having a criminal record when we are doing spiritual work.
I'm somebody who is very peaceful, and my peace somehow has been disturbed, because before I used to hear about stories, but to actually see it, it's a different matter. To hear something is something, but to see it, to be there as it happens, it's something totally different.
So if we want to talk about the legacy, these are the things we have to deal with. We don't have to get all complicated. We don't need anyone to theorise our condition. We certainly don't want politicians to rhetoricise our condition and tell us what our condition is. We know what it is. We know what the solutions are. We have the solutions. And for many of us, we are trying to solve the problems that are the innermost concerns for us as Africans. So we do things with our young people. We do things with our old people. What we need to think about is, why is it that when we do that good work, the political organisations who should be commending us and funding us do their best to try to counter, sanction, block, curtail and demonise what we try to do to uplift ourselves? That's what we need to think about. That is the historical legacy of chattel enslavement. It's not too complicated, you don't need a BA in it.
When we change the way we start thinking, when we start supporting, when we stop seeing barriers like, oh, this is Jamaica, something about Nigeria, or that's Nigeria, about to do that, when we stop that foolishness, when we stop it, we have to know what's back. Now, let's all sing together this beautiful African tune. Now listen. La 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 la. Everybody sing with me now. La. Let's all sing together now with the whole band. Here goes. Everybody outside of this record. Here goes now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody sing with me now. One more time.